Good afternoon, everybody. I'm not sure who's here a little earlier, but welcome. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. We're going to start right at noon, so about 4 minutes from now. So grab a coffee and settle in, and thanks again for attending.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think we will get started as we're just a minute or two after noon. So officially, good afternoon. And for those of you calling in from British Columbia, good morning. And welcome to our first ever professional advisor webinar designed specifically for you. Thank you very much for joining us today. We are thrilled to have this opportunity to engage with you, provide you some updates on the Calgary Foundation and philanthropic giving, especially at this challenging time. And we hoped that you and your loved ones are remaining healthy as we continue living through this global pandemic. My name is Jim Brownlee, Chair of the Calgary Foundation's Professional Advisor Engagement Committee, and it is my pleasure to kick off our event today. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement, as we do at the start of all Calgary Foundation meetings. In the spirit of reconciliation, we recognize and acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Iahe, Nakota Nations, Métis Nation, Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. As a community foundation, we rely on our partnerships and relationships, and a relationship we care deeply about is that of our professional advisor community. We hope that after today's session, you'll have a strong understanding of the Calgary Foundation's role in building community and supporting philanthropy. We hope you feel empowered to have values-based conversations and with your clients, which includes discussing the type of living legacy they hope to leave behind. I was just told I should start my video too, so you can see me as I'm saying this, so I will do that. And perhaps you'll even walk away today with a tip or two from our investment experts. At the Calgary Foundation, we work with donors, inspiring and informing philanthropy, sharing community knowledge, supporting their philanthropic activity, and engaging with family members. We know that every donor's charitable goals look different, and it's imperative that we personalize giving in a way that is meaningful for donors and their families. We act as conveners between charities, professional advisors, and donors, as well as facilitating meaningful conversations between both charities and donors as well. With deep roots in the Calgary community amassed over 65 years, we have the knowledge and expertise to help build capacity in a sector while also helping professional advisors and their clients make informed philanthropic decisions. As an advisor, you might provide guidance to clients who are just beginning to navigate the idea of philanthropic giving. Yet there is often a gap in the knowledge about charitable giving among financial planning experts. And we know this based on conversations we have with the advisor community and based on the learnings of recent surveys. The Calgary Foundation hopes to bridge this gap in knowledge with the recently formed Advisory Engagement Committee, whose 6 members bring together a wealth of experience. The committee's role is to educate peers on how to introduce philanthropy into their practices and to suggest Calgary Foundation's extensive gift planning services as one in their suite of client offerings. I'd like to now introduce to you the 6 members of our committee. Haider Hassan spent nearly 15 years in high-level roles related to financial advising before landing his current role as the CEO of Immigration Services Calgary. A couple of months ago, Haider was named as one of the 15 members of the Premier's Council on Charities and Civil Society. Blaine Lennox has over 24 years experience in the investment industry, 18 of them with Jarislowsky Fraser, currently as their Regional Director and Portfolio Manager. Blaine is also the current chair of the Calgary Foundation Investment Committee. Melanie McDonald is Vice President and Regional Director with BMO Trust Company. Using her expertise for trust and estate solutions, Melanie has long been involved in the community service and is able to offer professional advisors advice on how they can engage with clients on a philanthropic giving nature. Susan O'Brien is Senior Vice President and Senior Wealth Advisor for BMO Nesbitt Burns. She's a terrific advocate and ambassador for philanthropy and has incorporated strategic philanthropy seamlessly into her client practice over many years now. Elizabeth Peters, who's been in the financials field for decades, is portfolio manager for her own company, Liberty House Asset Management, managing private client portfolios, always with an eye to philanthropy. Elizabeth is also the Calgary Foundation's current board chair. And finally, myself, Jim Brownlee. I've been in the financial services industry now for over 35 years and am currently Vice President with Canada Life Assurance Company, managing our Canadian distribution. So all of this to simply say, we are so glad to have you here with us today. And to officially kick off our agenda, I would like to introduce Janine Webb. As Vice President Donor Engagement at the Calgary Foundation, Janine brings a wealth of charitable and philanthropic knowledge to her role. Janine equips lawyers, accountants, financial planners, and other professional advisors with the tools and knowledge to help clients create meaningful philanthropic plans. And with that, Janine, I'll pass it over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Jim. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get deep into our program here. We're going to leave a bit of time at the end of each section for Q&A. We ask that you submit your questions through the Q&A button, not the chat box. So when you're scrolling your mouse, your toolbar will might pop up at the top of your screen or the bottom of your screen, but it's the Q&A section that you want to list. And we have a group of my colleagues who will be checking those questions, and then we'll have time at the end of each section. Also, we know that we have a lot of content to cover, and so we're not going to get to everybody's questions, but your questions are important to us. And so we do want to let you know that we'll be curating those questions that we are not able to answer at the end here, and put together a document that we can send out later that'll answer some of those for you. So not to worry if we don't get to you. And throughout the presentation, again, we won't be taking questions we won't be taking questions verbally, just through the chat box. You'll have to type them in, please. So yeah, well, I'm just going to kick it off. I am going to turn off my camera for now. So a little bit about the community foundations. I mean, a number of you have had experiences with the Calgary Foundation, or if you're logging in from elsewhere in Canada with your local community foundation. But really a few things about community foundations, that we're about shifting power. We have a responsibility to shift power to those who best know the needs of our communities, as well as ensure diverse voices are at the table where important decisions about our future are being made. We're about strengthening community. Resilient communities are strong communities, and investing and supporting in all facets of community and civic life is at the core of who we are. And we take the long view. Community foundations have the opportunity of taking a long view, the capacity to work nimbly and collaboratively towards system change. A little bit more on the long view, actually, for those who don't know, community foundations were created in about 1914 by a professional advisor, so one of your own, an estate lawyer by the name of Fred Goff. And at the time, large amounts of money were being left through bequests and wills to charitable causes that either no longer existed or reflected the values and community needs. And so some of these examples were an orphan asylum for girls whose railroad worker fathers died on the job accidents, really specific requirements to be able to grant out this money. An endowment for Main Street watering troughs for horses, or directions that actually forbid an endowment, like most commonly to a school or college, from benefiting women or ethnic or religious minorities. So obviously, over the long term, these funds just sat, could not be granted out. And so community foundations actually were born. There are currently now 191 community foundations in Canada, granting about $4.5 billion each year. And each of us are focused on the unique needs of our community. We use this quote quite a bit because it really does encapsulate community foundations. We address the needs we cannot yet see and the people we will never meet. I can't tell you how poignant this quote is, never more than today. We find ourselves in an unparalleled time. It's a global pandemic no one could have predicted. COVID-19 spares no organization, no community, and no individual. And we are being called upon to assist organizations in every corner of the nonprofit sector. We have to adapt quickly to immediate needs, but we also have to plan ahead for recovery and inevitably rebuilding. We're really in uncharted territory here, and my colleague Jason Bates will chat more about this later in the presentation. So let's talk a little bit more and bring it back to how it is that we work with you. Community foundations are ideally positioned to help advisors develop and deliver customized giving solutions. And And the reason why the donor family is in the center of this partnership is because everything that we do starts with your client's why. From identifying appropriate fund vehicles, handling complex assets, we really offer extraordinary flexibility and support for the diverse and changing needs of the donors and the communities that we serve. So Calgary Foundation and many of our community foundation brothers and sisters across Canada allow donors to create their own giving and granting timeline and timetable, and even simplify the integration of their philanthropy into an estate plan. So we can tailor philanthropic consultations. Jim mentioned this in his opening comments. And we have expertise on the issues and organizations that your clients support, both locally, and we can grant across the globe as well, which is a little known fact about community foundations across Canada and otherwise. We also come to the table as philanthropic advisors. That's the area that we sit in. It is our area of expertise. We work in partnership with lawyers, insurance, financial advisors, accountants, financial planners. The more we can provide resources to the donor family to strategically and effectively guide their charitable investments and their philanthropy is more of a benefit. Obviously, the family benefits immensely. So we make supporting community easy and straightforward, which is important. We are in Calgary. We're a highly entrepreneurial city, and that's actually reflected in our funds. Here at the Calgary Foundation, of our approximate 1,300 funds, almost 50% are donor advised and donor designated. People want to follow their hard-earned dollars into the community that they love, and Calgarians in particular tend to grant to organizations within our city. While the vast majority of funds are endowed, and my colleague Blaine and Dan are going to talk a little bit about this later, we do also have flow-through funds. We can be responsive to donor short-term goals. We also are intricately tied into some business succession, because business succession and family philanthropy are tied together. Giving away money is easy, but doing it responsibly and effectively is actually difficult. And this is where we can come in. Working with the community foundation within the context of the company, business owners, can actually involve younger generations in those charitable decisions and then delegate some of the work to them. We often work with families as a way of helping them build the leadership within their family. We see critical thinking and interpersonal skills show up in the under the auspices of philanthropy that actually can be later applied in business. We get that feedback all the time. We've been doing this since 1955. We have been working with you to help your clients align your financial goals with their charitable goals. And we have enormous knowledge in the areas of complex estates, insurance, obviously gifts of public listed securities, closely held publicly traded securities, privately held company shares, gifts of real estate. So if it is highly complex, your community foundation most likely can handle the complexity. Quick snapshot of some of the current donor trends we're seeing here at the Calgary Foundation. So we've seen a significant increase in donor advised granting activity, 54% increase year over year in number of grants, and a 61% increase in total dollars granted. This makes sense to us because we have been educating, inspiring our fund founders and donors to support the community, to learn about what's happening during this time. And we have been there to support them with the knowledge that they need to make informed decisions. So we're very, very happy to see that donors are mobilizing their philanthropy in increased amounts, actually, which may not necessarily be what you'd expect. But Calgarians, when called upon, definitely stand up and help one another. COVID-19 is creating some new needs. While putting enormous financial pressure on all nonprofits, it's a game changer. So what we're seeing with our donor grant recommendations are actually following suit with the fact that everybody is in need. Donors are not only supporting COVID-related initiatives, which Jason will talk a little bit more about later, but also continuing to support those organizations that they've always supported. With greater need and not enough resources to support everyone, our donors are seeking out opportunities to leverage and amplify their philanthropy. So another trend that we're seeing is matching campaigns are obviously quite popular, be it organization-led, corporate, or provincial. And additionally, donors are recommending grants with very few designations or restrictions. By keeping the grant designations broad, charities are able to use the funds as they need, when they need it. And this is important right now, as none of us know what lay ahead. There has been a predominant increase in the number of legacy conversations of particular interest to this group, I'm sure. But yeah, the majority of all the prospect activity and new fund activity that we've had here in the last few months has been focused on testamentary planning and future funds. So that also doesn't necessarily surprise us. I'm sure you've all been quite busy in that area as well. Speaking of testamentary, Calgary Foundation is there to support you. When you're having these conversations, we're obviously there. We can provide will language, no cost future funds, no cost changes to charitable goals that live outside the will. We work with families on their philanthropy. Many families choose the Calgary Foundation as an alternative or a complement to setting up a private foundation because of our connections to the community and simply because it's administratively easier too. Together, we can help your clients and their families explore what their charitable goals are. And we have a whole host of tools that we use to be able to assist them with that. A good number of those tools will be sent out actually. We're gonna send out a link in our follow-up survey, and we'll send out some of those tools that we use on an ongoing basis to help families that you can absolutely put to use in your practice. We do charitable research, personal research for donors. Community knowledge is our value proposition. Our Community Knowledge Center is accessible, which again can help donors really research the charities and the needs in the community so they can make informed decisions about their philanthropy. We arrange meetings and tours and conversations with charities. And we do this, again, under the umbrella of a very important tenet for us, that what is important to the client, what is important to their family is important to us. We do not impose at the Calgary Foundation what our priorities are. While we have vital priorities and we're absolutely happy to educate and inform on the needs in the community, it is very important that advisors know we're deeply committed to the personal philanthropy of your clients, and we do always take our direction from them. So that is good. And these are just some of the tools that we have available. Comparing Your Option is a great document. We will send that out after this. For those of you who are talking to your clients that are not sure which way to go, a private foundation or a community foundation or a commercial fund, we can help outline the differences between the two without prioritizing one or the other. We believe all philanthropy in any form is actually a benefit to our communities. So we'll never sway anyone towards the Calgary Foundation. We do not fundraise. We don't ask for money. We are simply here to apply our expertise and help direct your clients and you to what is best for the client. And that includes, if the Calgary Foundation is not best, helping them find what is. And that's where I'm going to wrap up. I believe we don't have a whole lot of questions, so I think we can move right into one question. Do you work in partnership with charities on their legacy programs? Yes, actually. So I have a colleague, we have a colleague, Allison Schultz, and she is our Vice President Capacity Building, and it's quite unique. Allison's role is unique across Canada, first of her kind in community foundations, and her role is specifically to work on capacity building initiatives with charities. It is our commitment to be in subservient service to the charitable sector. So yes, the answer is yes. We have resources and certainly can provide you with contact information if you email me directly and hook you up with Allison so she can tell you a bit more about that. I'm going to pass it now to my colleague Blaine, and he's going to talk a little bit about our endowment, which I'm sure you're all going to be quite interested, and probably one of the big reasons most of you are here today. Blaine, you can take it away.
Great, thanks Janine. Good afternoon everyone. My name is Blaine Lennox. I'm the chair of the investment committee for the Calgary Foundation, and I'm joined for this segment of the presentation by Dan Langlois, who's our Chief Investment Officer and Vice President of Investments. So what we're going to be doing for the next 10 to 15 minutes is just describing to you what the governance structure is of Calgary Foundation's endowment, the investment strategy that we follow, and the historical investment results for the portfolio. So if we can move to the next slide, I'll begin just with kind of a high-level overview of the governance structure for the primary endowment fund. In brief, it's the board of directors of the Calgary Foundation that has ultimate responsibility for the fund, including the approval of the investment policy and the guidelines by which the fund is managed. The investment committee, which consists of 9 individuals, acts as an advisor to the board on investment strategy and policy for the endowment fund and has the responsibility of ensuring that the assets in the endowment fund are managed in accordance with the Foundation's investment policies and objectives. The committee itself is supported by our Vice President and Chief Investment Officer, Dan Langlois, who leads a 4-person internal investment team. And that team is responsible for both the day-to-day administration of the endowment portfolio, as well as providing recommendations to the investment committee on asset allocation strategy, investment manager structure, and selection. So I guess in addition to these resources, Calgary Foundation also utilizes a number of external parties. Performance reporting is provided to us by BNY Mellon. Our custodian, who holds the securities in which Calgary Foundation is invested, is CIBC Mellon. We utilize George & Bell Consulting to provide additional analytical support to Calgary Foundation's investment team. And then we have a total of 19 external investment managers across a variety of asset classes that invest Calgary Foundation's assets in accordance with the statement of investment policies or any specific guidelines that are particular to their individual mandates. If we move ahead one slide, Calgary Foundation follows an investment strategy that's commonly known in the industry as the endowment model. For those of you that are in the investment business, this model was first popularized by David Swenson at Yale University in the 1990s. And prior to Yale starting down this road, endowments and foundations typically had investment portfolios that were consisted only of public equities and publicly traded fixed income securities. What David Swenson did, or pioneered with the Yale model, was to argue that because of their unlimited time horizon, foundations and endowments are very well equipped to hold larger allocations to illiquid asset classes, which can be a very good source of excess returns for the portfolio. And in addition to having that very long time horizon and the ability to invest in illiquid asset classes, doing so would have or provide the portfolio with the benefit of diversifying into assets that have lower correlations with public market securities, which results in an overall portfolio structure that has lower volatility. So the results from the endowment model were very compelling, and in the early 2000s, as many people know, quite a few endowments and foundations in the US that had those long investment horizons and higher return requirements began to reduced their allocations to cash and fixed income to very low levels and diversified into alternative strategies in quite a significant way. Typically allocations anywhere from 60 to 80%, and alternative investments are common south of the border. Along the way, of course, we had the great financial crisis in 2008, 2009, and there were a few hiccups with investment portfolios that were invested according to this model. The primary cause was just the management of liquidity and probably unrealistic expectations from a portfolio construction perspective. But following the great financial crisis, portfolios invested this way continued to perform quite well. Calgary Foundation in 2013, coincident with Dan beginning in the VP Investments role, started down the path of implementing a lighter version of this model, recognizing that alternative investments can play a significant role in improving the risk-adjusted performance of a portfolio and overall top-line results, and at the same time minimizing risk. So where we are 7 years later after starting down this road is that we have an allocation right now of 45% to alternative investments in the portfolio. And the alternative investments include real estate, infrastructure, private equity, and private debt. So the other 55% of the portfolio is allocated as 40% to publicly traded equities, and then 15% to publicly traded bonds and cash reserves. So we're making progress towards these benchmark weights, but it takes longer to get fully invested in the alternative asset classes than it does in the public asset classes, and we do refresh our target allocations periodically. If we can move to the next slide. Before we jump into the performance results, I just thought we would spend a couple of minutes reviewing why an endowed fund is such a powerful tool for helping your clients achieve their philanthropic outcomes. As both Janine and Jim noted previously, Calgary Foundation was established to build and preserve a capital fund to both meet current needs in the community and to serve the needs of the future that we can't quite imagine what they would be today. And in doing so, we'll end up helping organizations and people that we'll never meet. Recent events, particularly the pandemic, have shown us that this sort of event is one that would be very difficult to anticipate in advance, and has certainly resulted in needs that are very significant relative to both the assets of the Calgary Foundation and the community in general. So serving these current and future needs is going to require each of us to look for the best way that we can extend ourselves and our resources to respond to. But this is exactly where the endowment model has significant power. If you have a successful investment strategy and a sustainable spending policy, a gift of any size into an endowment can result in grants that total the amount of the initial contribution within 20 years, while the original capital can still have a market value anywhere from 40 to 60% more than the original gift. So this is what constitutes a significant portion of the Calgary Foundation's assets. We have more than 1,000 funds structured like this. So Calgary Foundation is very well positioned to be able to provide a positive benefit to the community both now and for many years into the future. If we flip ahead one page to performance results, what we'd like to show you here is just how the overall endowment at Calgary Foundation has performed historically. The end date here is March 31st. I guess it would have been a little better to have June 30th, but it's still too early to have that information. But the key points when you look at this slide is that when you look at the long-term investment results for the strategy that the foundation has followed, what you see is that it's done very well, both on a relative basis compared to its benchmark, but more importantly, it's produced good nominal rates of return that outpace the real rate of return of the objective of the foundation, which is 5%. So the capital in the fund is continuing to grow, net of distributions and and expenses and net of inflation. So very pleased with the historical results, and particularly recently in what's been a very difficult market in the first part of this year, the portfolio has held its value quite well, and limited losses in the drawdown in the down markets. The asset class 1-year return slide we included just to give you an idea of how the different pieces of the portfolio have performed over the past year. And what you see is a couple of things here. Generally, good relative performance from our investment managers that are invested in the traditional public asset classes, but also good nominal performance and relative performance from the alternatives piece of the portfolio. And this has certainly helped cushion the losses on the downside in the first 3 months of 2020. And then looking ahead, the top 3 areas of focus for the foundation right now, really, the first one is just making sure that we continue to adhere to our investment policy. The statement of investment policies and strategies that we have in place is a very well-designed investment approach. So during difficult markets, it's key to stay true to that policy, not deviate from it, and make sure that you continue to manage within its guidelines. Secondly, the Foundation's investment team has been in constant contact with the investment managers that are managing the different pieces of our portfolio, making sure that everything is going well with their portfolios and being proactive in terms of addressing any concerns. And then thirdly, just looking at potential scenarios going forward for the markets and for the economy, and making sure that the endowment asset mix and liquidity is properly constructed to be able to deal with more adversity should that be what we experience in the second half of 2020. But overall, we've seen both good markets and we've seen difficult markets with this investment strategy, and the approach has been quite resilient and has protected capital on the downside and produced a good top line rate of return over the long term for the portfolio. Not sure if you'd like to, do you want to jump in with any additional comments now, Dan?
We have no questions at this time, so I think we're good.
Feel free, we'll have time at the end of our next session as well to answer questions. So populate them, put them in the Q&A, and then we'll leave some time at the end, obviously, of the presentation. And you can ask questions of any of the presenters, of course. Well, I guess we'll just pass it to you, Jason. Tell us a little bit about what's happening in the charitable sector.
Great, thanks, Janine. So yeah, good afternoon or good morning if you're in BC still. My name is Jason Bates, and I am the Vice President of Grants and Community Initiatives at the Foundation. I was born here in Calgary, and I was raised on a farm about an hour south of the city. I spent the majority of my life living, working, and playing on Treaty 7 territory, including 15 years serving our community both through public service with the federal government and now currently my work at the Foundation. So I'm going to lead you over the next few minutes through a very high-level description of what needs we've seen in the community and the charitable sector, and then what our response to those needs has been, what programs we've created, etc. And then finally touch very briefly on what happens next as the economy begins to open and those needs shift. So next slide. Actually, we'll go one more slide, please. Awesome. So needs. So the needs that we've seen in the community really fall into 4 main categories that you see here. The first is an increased demand on existing services. So this is especially true for charities that provide essential services such as food security and shelter. Of particular interest is the issue of rescued food. So if you're not sure what rescued food is, several charities in the city have a business model that relies on the charity collecting rescued, unused food from restaurants or grocery stores that's still totally edible, still completely healthy, and then they distribute that food to people who need it. So just as demand on that food was increasing, at the exact same time, all of the restaurants and other sources of food where they would get that rescued food closed down. And so that access was cut off, which then means there's a lot of people who are relying on that food that also had their access cut off. Other services that we've seen with an increased demand and that we expect to continue to see larger demands on, both as the pandemic and the economic crisis drag on, is mental health supports and supports for those experiencing domestic violence. It's not uncommon, unfortunately, to see a spike in domestic violence in times of natural disasters or in tough economic times. And unfortunately, this is both. Another unique need that we've seen is within the arts community. So overnight, theaters, museums, galleries, etc., they had to close their doors and instantly lost all of their earned revenue for the foreseeable future. In many cases, these organizations actually had outstanding bills for productions that they could no longer mount. So they had to pay for set construction or creating costumes, paying the contracts for actors, even though they couldn't mount the production and earn any revenue off of it. The next big bucket of needs is technology. So it's not uncommon for charities to operate on old or donated computers and technology, and often that technology is outdated by the time the charities receive it. So there was a huge need within the sector for new technology, both hardware and software, that allowed staff at charitable organizations to continue to work remotely, or so that they could transition their programs and continue to offer services to their clients virtually. The next big bucket was around safety equipment, which makes sense for charities that remained open during the pandemic, such as homeless shelters, emergency women's shelters, and so forth. They needed to increase their cleaning schedules. They had to purchase plexiglass dividers, masks, and other personal protective equipment. So that was also in there. And then finally, planning. So a lot of charities have been using the last couple of months and that sort of downtime to connect with their boards and their stakeholders to reimagine what their charity will look like and how they will operate post-pandemic. Next slide is what is our response? So how did we respond to this? We created a new granting program internally, and then we've also collaborated closely with others on additional sort of collaborative granting programs. So if you just want to go back one slide. So the first one is the program that we created, which was the Pandemic Response Fund. The second one is the Community Response Fund. And this was a partnership between the United Way and the City of Calgary's Emergency Management Agency. The foundation is also a part of that table, and it deals exclusively with requests for personal protective equipment and needs for frontline service delivery agencies. So this program has pretty much closed down at this point, but has been extremely active over the past 3 months. The next one is the Emergency Community Support Fund. This was a federal government program where the federal government distributed $350 million across the country through partnerships with Community Foundations Canada, United Way Centre Canada, and the Canadian Red Cross. So the Calgary Foundation received $2.3 million to distribute through this program. And by the end of this week, we will have exhausted those funds. And finally, the Rosé Foundation. Rosé Foundation is a local arts foundation here in the city. And we have been collaborating with them in response to those very specific needs that I mentioned earlier around the arts community. So money was used by arts companies to pay some of those outstanding bills for canceled shows and or to transition their artistic output to an online platform. Uniquely, many individual artists did not qualify for specific government support programs, such as CERB, the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, because artists are not considered to be full-time employees. They therefore don't qualify for that program. I'll talk a bit more about the Pandemic Recovery Fund, which is the one that we started. So next slide. So this program was designed to have 3 phases in mind: relief, Recovery, and Resilience. It was launched on April 2nd, and so the first phase has run for about 3 months, and it offers emergency funding to charities. It will close at the end of this week, as again, the money has been exhausted for that program. So far, if you go to the next slide. So far over the last 3 months, we have distributed almost $7 million to 200 charities, which is an incredible amount of work, an incredible amount of money going out into the community. However, the demand on our resources is always greater than the resources that we have. So if you go to the next slide, this image just shows the source of the funds that we have been using for all of these different granting programs. So by the end of this week, we will have exhausted these relief funds and then thereby closed the first phase of our pandemic recovery program. This was planned from the beginning because the first sort of 3 to 4 months were designed to be emergency funding and relief funding. That has now ended, and we will begin to transition to the next phase of the program as the economy begins to reopen following community health guidelines. So that next phase of the program, in the next slide, is recovery. So we leaned pretty hard with recovery as branding at the beginning of the pandemic. And while recovery sort of creates the image of returning to a previous state, what we're really talking about is rebuilding and reimagining charitable operations. There will undoubtedly be a focus on sustained collaboration in a post-pandemic world where mergers and coalitions will emerge as a common response to the challenges of our new reality. Over the next few weeks, Calgary Foundation is going to be reaching out to charities and to the community to get their input on what type of funding would be most beneficial to them for this recovery portion. And then we will spend the rest of the summer designing the next phase of that program so that it is truly community informed and community led. As Janine mentioned earlier, we are always in service of community, and so we really want to center them in this conversation. This phase of the program will launch in the fall, and TBD as to what it actually looks like still. And then finally, the last slide. In 2021, we will launch the final phase of our program. So if you go to the next slide, and that final phase is resilience. So during this phase, we will focus on building capacity and strength within the charitable sector to be more adaptive and more resilient in the face of future crises. So that's how we sort of laid out our program. And thanks. And then back to you, Janine.
Excellent. Thanks, Jason. I'll ask all of the panelists to turn on their cameras now, and we can answer a couple of questions. We have just a few minutes. We've managed to get through all of this content in good time. So we're just going to look at the Q&A. And so there's a question around donor advised funds. Is there a minimum threshold in assets that clients should have in order to be referred? Calgary Foundation, I'll answer that one. The Calgary Foundation does have a minimum fund establishment amount of $10,000. Having said that, our priority is to inspire, inform, and educate philanthropy. And we absolutely do not want a fund minimum to be a barrier between a potential philanthropist, a millennial philanthropist, and a young up-and-comer. Yeah, we can work around that, actually. We have and will establish funds for less money. However, we won't grant from those funds until the $10,000 precipice has been met. With the endowment model, we do grant at 4%. And so again, a year after a fund has had a chance to grow with pooled assets, 4% of a $10,000 fund, is about what we'd be sending out the door. But please, if you have donors of any size, actually, that are interested in funds of the Calgary Foundation. But having said that, I think it's important again to reaffirm that we don't fundraise. So our services, our knowledge, and our supports are available regardless of whether a fund is established. We are happy to work with you, your clients, and potential donors, and inform their philanthropy regardless, and especially if their philanthropy is just designed to go straight to a charity without having passed through us at all. That's a win for the community and a win for us either way. So yes, the answer short form is we can work with whatever it is that you need. Next question. Dan, I think I'll let you take the investment committee question.
Yeah, so we have a question here that says, does the investment committee have a strategy for potentially for a wild market volatility in November due to the elections? And to answer that question specifically, no, we don't have a specific strategy around whether that specific incident. But what we have a strategy around is, of course, as our portfolio is very well diversified. And as Blaine had alluded to in the closing comments, we do have a statement of investment policy that helps protect us against making irrational decisions in an environment of high volatility. One of the things you don't want to be doing is in periods of crisis is making policy decisions, because typically what happens is when you do that, it's based on emotion and it becomes the exception rather than the norm. So what we have been doing is looking at various scenarios instead of looking at broad-based predictions and forecasts that invariably don't ever come to fruition. So for example, we look at what happens if the market falls off and retests its lows. What will happen in that scenario to our asset mix, to our liquidity, and we just plan those various scenarios.
Awesome. I'll jump in. There's a few more investment questions, as I suspect there will be. But one of the questions is, are your donor advised funds all endowment funds, or do you allow a grant distribution in excess of 4%? So we do have flow through funds. Again, we build, our fund structure has evolved over time, while definitely again, our value proposition is endowment, the strength of our endowment, as you've heard, and the power of it to address needs now and in the future. But we understand that donors have immediate desires with their philanthropy. And so we have flow through funds, and we also can establish funds that are shorter term than in perpetuity. Really, it is just a conversation. Every time we meet with a client or meet with someone, we want to get to the heart of what it is that they hope to achieve with their philanthropy. And then we will most certainly have some support or a way of supporting their philanthropy. That is our goal at the end. And again, if it is not with us, but there's someone else who could do a better job, we would open those doors and certainly facilitate those conversations as well. So our flow through funds don't have a minimum distribution amount. At any time, those funds could be distributed in part or in whole. It is our endowment funds, however, that do have a grant distribution of 4%. And Blaine touched on again where that number, I think, comes from in terms of our model for supporting the community, but also preserving capital. So yeah, that's the long and the short of it there. And then also I have a question from Tracy's, how can a charity set up an endowment with a foundation? Tracy, happy to actually connect you with my colleague, Allison Schultz. So again, in her unique role, she oversees our charitable portfolio and can definitely assist your organization or the organization you support with that. So my contact information is right on the screen there. And please do reach out, and then I can provide that information for you, and Allison would be happy to talk to you about that. Dan, there's a few more lots of investment questions, so I'll let you and Blaine jump in here.
Yeah, there's a few here, and it's under the general category of ESG. And recently we did evaluate all of our managers and their policies and their processes around ESG. We really did want to get a better understanding around how they incorporate ESG in their investment process and how they make investment decisions around ESG. And then specifically, how they're engaging management in their companies and their underlying companies. Is this just ticking the box exercise, or are they actually actively engaging management? At the foundation, we do routinely inquire about proxy voting as well with all of our managers. We do not screen either positively or negatively on the portfolios. And to date, we have not invested in any SRI type investment fund vehicles.
All right. Well, I think we've answered. There is one more, the private equity measures tied to our charitable mission or vital priorities, Dan?
Not specifically, but we do have managers that do have a significant ESG component within their traditional mandate. So we do have infrastructure managers on our platform where ESG is incorporated at a very significant level. And there are, for example, significant components of their investment platform have renewable energy in their investments, but no, not specifically tied to our priorities.
Jason, can I ask you to just pop in quickly and talk a little bit about our vital priorities? We have about 5 minutes here, and I think that the question kind of opens the door, and I certainly mentioned it previously, how we have our vital priorities, but clients' priorities are our priorities. But talk a little bit about what those are, just as a way for our advisors to let their clients know the areas that we're particularly keeping our eye on.
Sure. So I think the first thing that I would sort of use to frame the conversation is that the vital priorities are not really the priorities of the Calgary Foundation. They are the priorities of the community. So about 5 to 6 years ago now, we undertook an extensive community engagement process where we interviewed hundreds of people across the city, where we did a deep dive into some of the research through our vital signs survey about what are the issues that really mean something to Calgarians, where the Calgary Foundation could actually have an impact or could actually sort of layer itself on top of those. And at the end of that process, we came 5 sort of priority areas were revealed. The first one was poverty reduction. The second one was around pursuing a sustainable future, which is around sort of environmentalism and protection. The third was living a creative life, which is about access to the arts and to creative industries. The next was access to mental health supports. And then the final one was reconciliation or strengthening relationships with Indigenous communities. So those are the 5 sort of priority areas that the community came to us with. We do fund outside of those priority areas. We are a 360-degree fund maker or grant maker. So we can still offer grants for, cancer or for seniors' homes or things like that. But those are 5 areas where we pay particular attention and really try to sort of lift them up. If you look on our website, there's a number of impact reports that have been generated around the different vital priority areas that talk both about the positive things that have happened in the community over the past few years, and then opportunities for future investments and sort of some future directions that the foundation could move in or that other grant makers could move in to support those priority areas better.
Thanks, Jason. We have one more question. Yes, Pat, thank you so much. We will provide this recording afterwards. And we'll send that out. Actually, we'll send the link to where it'll be posted on our website. So having said that, I think we're getting you out about 3 minutes early. And I know we covered a lot in this, but this really was our first webinar to address some of the threads of conversations that we've had with you all over the past few months and some of the questions that have come up consistently. Certainly not the last of our webinars. We do hope that in the survey that will come out in the next couple of days, that you'll be able to provide us with direction as to additional areas that you would love to see us present, some topics that you would find interesting from your community foundation. And we'd be happy to do so. So on behalf of our presenters, Jason, Dan, Blaine, Jim, thank you so much. And my team behind the scenes answering your questions, Taylor, Darby, and Grace. But most importantly, your advisor engagement committee that we do hope you will engage with, and we look forward to, again, meeting in person, hopefully sometime in 2020. But on behalf of Jim Brownlee, the chair of our committee, Hyder Hazan, Blaine Lennox, Melanie McDonald, Susan O'Brien, and Elizabeth Peters, we thank you again for attending, and we look forward to our next get-together.